Greetings and welcome to this quiet journey through history. Tonight, we embark on a tranquil exploration of one of the most remarkable figures of the late Middle Ages, Joan of Arc. Our narrative is woven into the tapestry of a protracted and devastating conflict, a struggle that would define the destiny of nations for over a century, the 100 Years' War. Settle in, find a comfortable position, and allow the gentle rhythm of our story to carry you. The world we are entering is one of flickering candlelight and shadowed castles. It is the late 14th and early 15th centuries, a time when the very soil of France is torn by a deep-seated dynastic struggle. The English throne, held by the House of Plantagenet, lays a claim to the French crown through ancient familial ties. This claim, though tenuous, ignites a series of devastating conflicts that would rage on and off for over 116 years. This is not a war of single battles, but a slow-burning feud, marked by long sieges, devastating raids known as chevauchées, and periods of uneasy truce. As we begin our quiet drift through time, we find the English gaining a significant upper hand. Legendary victories at Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers in 1356 solidify their dominance, but the turning point, the moment of English supremacy, comes at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Here, a seemingly impossible English victory under King Henry V decimates the French nobility. The image of the English longbow, a weapon of devastating power, becomes etched into the French memory. Following Agincourt, the political landscape of France crumbles. The reigning French king, Charles VI, known as the Mad, is unable to rule effectively, and the country fragments into warring factions. The most significant of these are the Armagnacs, who support the heir to the throne, the Dauphin Charles, and the Burgundians, who ally themselves with the English. This internal strife, a civil war raging within the larger conflict, leaves France vulnerable and fractured. The Treaty of Troyes, signed in 1420, is a dark moment for the French. It disinherits the Dauphin and names the English king, Henry V, as the regent and heir to the French throne. This is the world that a young girl is born into, a land ruled by foreign powers, a people despairing of their future, a nation in search of a miracle. Far from the great courts and bloody battlefields, our story finds its humble beginning in the small village of Domremy, in the eastern corner of France. Here, nestled in a quiet valley, stands a modest stone house, home to a simple peasant family. It is here, around 1412, that a girl named Jehanne is born. Her family is devout, and her world is small, bounded by the fields and forests, the nearby church, and the rhythm of rural life. She is a girl of deep faith, her days filled with prayer and quiet work. The distant echoes of the war, the raiding parties, and the stories of English and Burgundian aggression are the only hints of the wider world. But in this quiet life, something profound begins to stir within her. She experiences visions and hears voices, which she later identifies as the voices of saints. St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret. These voices, she says, deliver a divine mission to save France. This is the moment where the quiet faith of a peasant girl begins to converge with the tumultuous destiny of a nation. Her story is a testament to the power of belief, a quiet flame of hope in a world shrouded in darkness. We will follow her from her simple home to the courts of kings and finally to the flames of history. And in doing so, we will come to understand how a single life can change the course of an entire war. Now, let us begin our journey. As we continue our journey, leaving behind the fractured kingdom of France, we arrive in the quiet and unassuming village of Domremy, nestled in the serene countryside. This is not the grand stage of kings and knights, but a humble landscape of rolling hills and simple stone houses, where the gentle pace of life is dictated by the seasons and the land. It is here that a young girl named Jehanne spends her formative years, a time of profound spiritual growth and quiet observation. Her world is small and intimate, but her faith is vast and deep. Her family, humble peasants, are devout Catholics, and their lives are anchored in the rhythms of prayer and the teachings of the Church. The threat of war feels distant, a looming shadow rather than an immediate presence, yet it shapes everything. Stories of English and Burgundian raiders are whispered at night, and the local church offers a constant refuge and source of solace. It is in this peaceful, contemplative life that Joan begins to experience something extraordinary. She is around 12 or 13 years old when she first hears them. Voices, clear and distinct, that seem to come from a divine source. At first, she is frightened and unsure, but over time she comes to understand that these voices are a message from God, delivered by saints. She identifies them as Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch. These are not hallucinations born of a fevered imagination. To Joan, they are a profound, unshakable reality. The voices, she says, are accompanied by a brilliant light, filling her with a sense of awe and purpose. The messages are simple at first, urging her to live a good life, to be pious and obedient. But as the 100 Years' War continues to rage and the political situation for the French grows ever more desperate, the tenor of the messages changes. The voices begin to deliver a monumental and impossible command. She must go to the aid of the Dauphin Charles and lead him to be crowned king. This is a task of staggering proportions for a simple, illiterate peasant girl. It defies all social conventions and military logic. She is not a noblewoman, not a knight, and has no experience in warfare or courtly life. Yet, the divine command is unyielding. Her first act is to travel to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs and seek out the garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt. This journey is a testament to her unwavering belief. The trip is perilous, and she faces ridicule and dismissal. Baudricourt, a seasoned soldier, initially scoffs at the notion of a young girl on a divine mission. He sees a pious but delusional peasant, not a savior. He sends her away, advising her to return to her father and her quiet life. But Joan is persistent. She returns again and again, her conviction unwavering. The townspeople, observing her faith and her quiet resolve, are moved. A few begin to believe in her, seeing in her a purity and a sense of purpose that feels divinely inspired. Eventually, Baudricourt, perhaps swayed by the growing support for Joan and the dire political situation, agrees to see her. A new prophecy has spread that France would be saved by a maiden from the marches of Lorraine, and Joan's story begins to align with this folk belief. He finally relents and gives her an escort, a small band of knights, to take her on the long and dangerous journey to Chinon, where the Dauphin Charles holds his court. This is a journey of hundreds of miles, through territory controlled by hostile Burgundian and English forces. It is an act of incredible bravery and faith. Joan, no longer just a girl from Domremy, cuts her hair short, dons men's clothing, a practical measure for a long and dangerous ride, and sets off on the journey that will change the course of history. As she rides, she is no longer just a listener of voices, but an active participant in a divine mission, a vessel of hope for a desperate people. The quiet peasant girl is now on the path to becoming a legendary warrior, a journey that begins with a single, courageous step into the unknown. We leave her now on this perilous path, riding toward the heart of the kingdom, a land in need of a miracle. We leave Joan of Arc on her perilous journey, a quiet figure of resolute faith making her way across a war-torn landscape. Her destination is the castle of Chinon, a formidable fortress perched above the Vienne River in central France. This is the temporary residence of the Dauphin Charles, the uncrowned heir to the French throne. The air at Chinon is thick with despair and uncertainty. The Dauphin's cause seems hopeless. His coffers are nearly empty. His supporters are fragmented, and the English and their Burgundian allies control vast swaths of the kingdom, including the traditional coronation city of Reims. The Dauphin himself is a man steeped in sorrow and doubt, burdened by a deep-seated fear that he may not be the legitimate heir, a doubt planted by his enemies and fueled by the scandalous Treaty of Troyes. When Joan arrives at the castle, she is met with profound skepticism. The court is a place of intrigue and suspicion, and a peasant girl claiming to hear divine voices is not just an anomaly, but a potential threat. To test her, the Dauphin and his advisors devise a clever ruse. He hides himself among his courtiers, dressing in simple clothes, while a nobleman is placed on the throne to impersonate him. This is a moment of high drama, a test not just of her divine connection, but of her ability to navigate a world far removed from her village. Joan, undeterred, walks into the great hall, a space of echoing stone and flickering torches. Her eyes, filled with a quiet certainty, scan the faces of the assembled men. She walks past the nobleman on the throne, goes directly to the man in the crowd, and kneels before him, saying, "Gentlemen, God give you good life. God save the Dauphin." The stunned courtiers watch as she addresses Charles directly. This act, her ability to instantly recognize him despite the deception, is a powerful first sign. It is a moment of profound validation and the first crack in the wall of doubt surrounding the Dauphin. But this is not enough. The court needs further proof. Joan is subjected to rigorous interrogation by a council of theologians and scholars in Poitiers. For 3 weeks, they question her on her faith, her visions, and her claims. This is a meticulous and thorough examination, not of her sanity, but of her theological orthodoxy. They want to ensure she is not a heretic or a tool of the devil. Joan, in her simple and direct way, answers their questions with a clarity and conviction that disarms them. When asked to perform a miracle to prove her claims, she famously replies, "I have not come to Poitiers to work signs, but send me to Orleans, and I will show you a sign." Her faith is her only argument, and it is a powerful one. Finally, the theologians are satisfied. They issue a formal report stating that they found nothing but purity, integrity, humility, and simplicity in her words. They conclude that it is safe to believe in her mission. This official endorsement is a turning point. It grants her the credibility she needs to be taken seriously by the Dauphin and his military commanders. And so, the quiet girl from Domremy is given a suit of armor, a banner emblazoned with the fleur-de-lis and the names of Jesus and Mary, and a retinue of soldiers. She is now ready to embark on the military phase of her mission. She is not a general in the modern sense, but a symbol, a beacon of hope, and a source of divine inspiration. She is a chef de guerre, a war leader, though her primary role is to lift the morale of the French troops and restore a sense of destiny to their king. We leave the castle of Chinon now, with Joan at the head of a small army, a new kind of warrior setting out to face a besieged city and change the course of a seemingly lost war. As we continue our gentle journey, we arrive at the pivotal moment of our story, the besieged city of Orleans. For 6 months, the city has been surrounded by English forces, its defenders trapped and its people starving. The English, commanded by the formidable Earl of Salisbury and later the Earl of Suffolk, have constructed a ring of fortifications around the city, a series of bastions and small forts known as bastilles and boulevards. The most significant of these is a large fortress at the southern end of the city's main bridge, known as Les Tourelles. This strategic stronghold makes a full-scale French assault nearly impossible. Orléans is the gateway to the Dauphin's territory, and its fall would likely spell the end of French resistance, allowing the English to press deeper into the heartland and claim complete victory. The morale of the French defenders is at a nadir. They feel abandoned, and their cause seems lost. It is into this atmosphere of despair that Joan of Arc arrives. She does not arrive with a large, seasoned army, but with a small relief force, carrying supplies and a renewed sense of purpose. Her arrival is not just a military event, it is a psychological one. She sends a letter to the English commanders, demanding that they lift the siege and return to their own country, speaking with the authority of a divine messenger. The English, in turn, mock her, calling her the Armagnac harlot, but her defiance plants a seed of unease in their minds. The French soldiers, who have been enduring months of grueling siege, are instantly reinvigorated by her presence. They see in her not a military tactician, but a living embodiment of God's will, a tangible sign that they have not been forgotten. Joan's first major action is to lead a direct assault on the English forts. She rides on a white horse, her banner held high, a figure of hope and courage. Her military commanders, seasoned veterans like John de Dunois, are initially hesitant, preferring a more cautious, tactical approach. But Joan's determination is infectious. She urges them to strike with speed and divine conviction, arguing that God is on their side. Under her inspiration, the French forces launch a series of bold, decisive attacks. The English bastilles, which had seemed impregnable, begin to fall one by one. The most critical moment of the siege comes with the assault on Les Tourelles, the fortress guarding the bridge. This is a fierce and bloody battle. Joan is struck by an arrow between her neck and shoulder, a wound that would have been a catastrophic blow to morale. But instead of retreating, she is taken to a nearby field, where she tends to her wound and prays. She then returns to the battlefield, a figure of seemingly divine invulnerability. Her return galvanizes the French troops who, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, launch a final, furious assault. The English, seeing their commander, Sir William Glasdale, fall from the collapsing bridge into the river and facing a relentless and newly inspired French attack, are overwhelmed. Les Tourelles is captured, and the English are forced to retreat, lifting the siege. The relief of Orléans is a stunning and unexpected victory. It is not a triumph of military strategy in the conventional sense, but a profound victory of morale and faith. The English have suffered their first major defeat in decades, and their aura of invincibility is shattered. For the French, this is more than just a military success. It is a sign that the tide of the war has turned. The humble girl from Domremy has delivered on her promise, and the people of France begin to see her not just as a religious figure, but as the savior of their nation. Orléans, once a symbol of French defeat, becomes a testament to the power of belief and the indomitable spirit of a single girl. With the siege of Orléans lifted, a wave of euphoria and renewed hope sweeps through the French kingdom. The Dauphin Charles and his advisors, however, remain cautious. They are still hesitant to take the next crucial step of Joan's mission, marching to Reims for the coronation. Reims is deep in enemy-held territory, far to the north and east, surrounded by hostile Burgundian and English garrisons. A military campaign of this scale would be fraught with danger. The strategic value of the march is not immediately apparent to the military leaders, who prefer a more pragmatic, incremental approach to reclaiming territory. Yet, for Joan, the coronation is not a tactical option, but a divine imperative. She insists that Charles must be crowned in the traditional manner to legitimize his reign and prove to all of France and the world that he is the rightful king. Joan, alongside a small but determined force of loyal commanders like the Duke of Alençon and the Bastard of Orléans, embarks on a campaign to clear the way to Reims. This is not a series of massive battles, but a relentless and strategic push. They first target the Loire Valley, an area still controlled by the English, capturing several key strongholds in a series of swift and decisive engagements. The Battle of Jargeau and the Battle of Patay are particularly notable. At Patay, a significant English force is routed, a stunning reversal of fortune that shatters the myth of English invincibility and demoralizes their troops. The French, inspired by Joan, fight with a newfound ferocity and confidence. The march itself is a masterclass in psychological warfare. As Joan's army advances, town after town, which had been under Burgundian or English control, opens its gates without a fight. The citizens, hearing of the victories at Orléans and Patay, see her as a divine figure, a liberator sent by God. The fear and despair that had gripped them for so long is replaced by a profound sense of hope. The sight of Joan on her white horse, her banner flying, becomes a powerful symbol of French national identity and resistance. She is not merely a military commander, she is a political and spiritual force, uniting a fractured kingdom under a single, divinely ordained purpose. On July 16, 1429, the army arrives at the gates of Reims. The city, a key Burgundian stronghold, surrenders without a single fight. The next day, in the magnificent Reims Cathedral, the coronation takes place. The ceremony is a moment of profound symbolism. In the presence of a few loyal nobles and a crowd of ecstatic citizens, the Dauphin is anointed with the holy oil and crowned as King Charles VII. This act transforms him from a hesitant, disinherited prince into the undisputed, legitimate monarch of France. The coronation is a victory more significant than any battle. It provides a focal point for national loyalty and solidifies the French claim to sovereignty, undermining the English claim and the Treaty of Troyes. Following the coronation, Joan's mission, as she understood it, is largely complete. Her voices had told her to lift the siege of Orléans and lead the king to his coronation. She has accomplished both. She now urges Charles to press on and march on Paris, the capital city held by the English and Burgundians. Charles, however, remains cautious, and negotiations with the Duke of Burgundy lead to a frustrating truce. This is a turning point where the practicalities of political maneuvering begin to clash with the divine urgency of Joan's mission. The relentless energy that carried her from Domremy to Reims begins to meet the cold, calculating realities of courtly politics. We leave her now, a triumphant but increasingly isolated figure, as the forces that she helped unleash begin to move in directions she did not foresee. The triumph of Reims and the subsequent victories instilled a deep sense of confidence in the French, but they also sowed the seeds of Joan's downfall. Following the coronation, her strategic vision began to diverge from that of King Charles II and his court. While Joan passionately argued for a direct and immediate assault on Paris to fully reclaim the capital, the king and his advisors, particularly the influential Georges de la Tremoille, favored a more cautious approach. They pursued a diplomatic path, engaging in a series of truces and negotiations with the Duke of Burgundy, who remained a powerful and dangerous ally of the English. This political maneuvering was a source of great frustration for Joan, who believed in swift, decisive action guided by her divine mission. During the failed siege of Paris in September 1429, Joan was wounded and the French army was forced to retreat. This setback, combined with the king's cautious nature, marked a turning point. She was no longer seen as an infallible symbol of victory by some at court, and her influence began to wane. The king, having achieved his primary goal of being crowned, was content to pursue a strategy of attrition and diplomacy rather than a costly and risky full-scale war. Joan, however, remained committed to her mission to drive the English out of France entirely. In the spring of 1430, Joan was in Compiègne, a town under siege by the Burgundians. She led a small sally, a desperate attempt to break the siege. However, the town's drawbridge was raised prematurely, trapping her and her small company outside the city walls. She was surrounded by Burgundian forces and, after a fierce struggle, was pulled from her horse and captured. The date was May 23, 1430. This capture was a moment of profound significance. The Burgundians, her bitter enemies, now held the person who would become the very embodiment of French resistance. Her capture set off a chain of events that would ultimately lead to her death. The Burgundians, led by Jean de Luxembourg, saw her not just as a prisoner of war, but as a valuable prize to be sold. The English, in turn, were desperate to get their hands on her. She represented everything they had lost, their military dominance and their claim to the French throne. They were willing to pay a substantial sum for her, as her capture was a massive propaganda victory and an opportunity to destroy the symbol that had so inspired their enemies. Charles VII, who she had helped crown, made no significant attempts to ransom her. He was either politically unwilling or financially unable to do so, a decision that has been debated by historians ever since. After a series of transfers, Joan was sold to the English and taken to Rouen, the capital of English-occupied Normandy. She was imprisoned in the city's castle under the watchful eye of a bishop named Pierre Cauchon, a pro-English cleric and a political enemy of Charles VII. The English did not want to execute her as a prisoner of war, which would have simply made her a martyr. They wanted to discredit her completely. They sought to prove that her victories were not the work of God, but of the devil, thereby invalidating the legitimacy of Charles VII's coronation and nullifying her influence. Thus, a political trial disguised as a religious inquisition was convened. It was presided over by Bishop Cauchon, with a panel of theologians and legal experts. This was not a fair trial, but a highly biased proceeding, designed to achieve a predetermined outcome. Joan's accusers were her judges, and she was denied a legal counsel. The stage was now set for the final, tragic chapter of her life, a period of relentless interrogation and psychological warfare that would test her faith and resolve to their very limits. We now leave the bustling, anxious world of politics and warfare and enter the quiet, menacing confines of a medieval courtroom. We now enter the solemn and unforgiving chambers of Rouen Castle, where Joan of Arc is held captive and subjected to a relentless inquisition. This is not a battlefield of steel and arrows, but a psychological and theological struggle of immense proportion. The setting is intimate and cold, a stone room filled with somber men, all of them her judges. The trial begins in February 1431, and its purpose is clear: to prove that Joan is a heretic and a sorceress, a puppet of the devil, thereby invalidating King Charles VII's coronation and tarnishing the French cause forever. The man at the helm is Bishop Pierre Cauchon, a pro-English cleric with a strong political agenda. The interrogation process is grueling. Joan is questioned for hours on end, often without rest. The prosecutors, a panel of learned theologians, ask her intricate and complex theological questions, questions that would challenge even the most educated scholar. They delve into her visions, her voices, and her claims of divine inspiration, attempting to find a single contradiction or a slip of heresy. They question her about wearing men's clothing, a transgression of biblical law in their eyes. They interrogate her about the nature of her voices, pressing her to name the saints and to describe the visions in detail. Her responses are a masterclass in quiet resilience and unwavering faith. Despite her lack of formal education, Joan responds with remarkable wit and intelligence. When asked if she knew she was in God's grace, a question designed to trap her, for to say yes would be an arrogant claim of divine knowledge, and to say no would be to admit to sin, she famously replies, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." This simple, profound answer confounds her accusers. She maintains a consistent and unwavering account of her divine mission, refusing to be drawn into complex theological traps. Her strength of character and her deep piety are evident, even under such immense pressure. The trial, however, is a farce. Joan is held in a military prison rather than an ecclesiastical one, a deliberate choice that allows her to be guarded by English soldiers rather than nuns. The conditions are harsh, and she is chained to her bed, subjected to threats and harassment. The transcript of the trial, meticulously recorded, shows a woman who is exhausted, isolated, and yet completely steadfast in her beliefs. The English, frustrated by their inability to break her, resort to increasingly coercive tactics. They threaten her with torture, though it is not clear if they ever followed through. They also parade her before an assembly of public officials and clergy in an attempt to publicly humiliate her and force a confession. In a moment of profound psychological pressure, facing the prospect of being burned at the stake, Joan briefly recants. She signs a document, perhaps a confession, renouncing her voices and agreeing to wear women's clothing. This moment of weakness, likely born of fear and exhaustion, is a temporary reprieve. However, a few days later, she reclaims her men's clothing and her original convictions. She explains that the voices had reproached her for her weakness and that she would rather die than betray her divine mission. This act of defiance, this return to her truth, seals her fate. The English now have what they need, a relapsed heretic, a crime punishable by death. The trial, for all its pretense of religious scrutiny, was always a political weapon, and with her final act of courage, Joan gave them the final pretext they needed to destroy her. We leave her now, a figure of profound sorrow and unwavering courage, as the final act of her story is about to unfold. The final act of Joan of Arc's life unfolds on a somber morning in May 1431 in the heart of Rouen. Following her recantation and subsequent relapse, the English and their French collaborators have the pretext they need. The sentence is declared. She is to be burned at the stake as a relapsed heretic. The verdict, delivered by Bishop Cauchon, is a foregone conclusion. The political motivations of the trial have reached their tragic and inevitable climax. The English hope that her public execution will not only silence the girl who haunted them on the battlefield, but also completely discredit the legitimacy of King Charles VII. The execution takes place in the marketplace of Rouen, a public square filled with a large crowd of both English soldiers and French civilians. The atmosphere is tense and filled with a somber anticipation. A wooden pyre, tall and imposing, stands at the center of the square. A banner is presented to her, a simple cross, and as she is led to the scaffold, she requests a priest to hold a crucifix before her. A friar, Martin Ladvenu, does so, and she holds it close, her final moments marked by a profound sense of faith and piety. As the flames are lit, Joan's last words are a cry to her saints and to God. Her final moments are captured in the few surviving accounts from witnesses. She cries out, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus!" And as the fire takes hold, she remains steadfast in her belief. Her last act is not one of defiance, but of prayer and acceptance, an act that deeply moves many of the onlookers, including some of her English captors. The English, in their eagerness to ensure her destruction, had the pyre constructed in such a way that the flames would burn her quickly. After her death, they rake through the ashes to show the crowd that she is truly dead. a spectacle meant to prevent any lingering belief in her miraculous survival. Her ashes are then gathered and scattered into the River Seine, a final, chilling act to prevent her followers from collecting any relics. The death of Joan of Arc is a moment of profound sadness, but it is also a moment of powerful martyrdom. The English had intended to destroy a symbol, but in doing so, they created a legend. Their elaborate and politically motivated trial, culminating in her public execution, gave her a status far beyond that of a mere prisoner of war. She did not die in a military defeat, but as a martyr for her faith and for her nation. The very methods her enemies used to discredit her ultimately solidified her status as a saint and a hero in the eyes of the French people. The immediate aftermath is one of quiet shock. The English, for all their efforts, find that their victory is a hollow one. The fear of Joan's spirit and the power of her story begin to take hold. While her death momentarily gives the English a sense of triumph, it does nothing to reverse the military tide that she had already turned. The French, though momentarily stunned and saddened, find a new resolve in her martyrdom. Her death becomes a rallying cry, a final, unyielding symbol of their national cause. We now leave the ashes of Rouen, but the story of Joan of Arc is far from over. The quiet girl from Domremy is now a figure of immense power, her legacy just beginning to unfold in the hearts and minds of a nation she had helped to save. Following the execution of Joan of Arc, the 100 Years' War was far from over, but the psychological landscape of the conflict had been fundamentally altered. The English, despite their temporary triumph in Rouen, found that they had not extinguished the flame of French resistance. They had simply made it burn brighter. The martyrdom of Joan provided a powerful rallying cry and a unifying symbol for a nation that had been splintered by dynastic squabbles and civil war. Her death solidified the French conviction that they were fighting a righteous war for their homeland, guided by God's will. King Charles VII, though he had done little to save Joan, was now the beneficiary of her sacrifice. He and his commanders, no longer facing the specter of an invincible English army, adopted a new strategy. They continued the slow and steady process of reclaiming French territory, no longer driven by the divine urgency of Joan, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The English, meanwhile, were facing their own internal troubles. The death of King Henry V in 1422 and the subsequent regency for his infant son, Henry VI, created political instability. As the war dragged on, the English treasury was drained and public support for the costly foreign adventure waned. The final phase of the war saw a slow but inexorable shift in momentum. The French, under Charles VII, began to professionalize their army, moving away from a reliance on feudal levies and toward a standing army of paid soldiers. The development of new siege technologies, particularly the use of cannons, proved to be a decisive factor. Fortresses that had once seemed impregnable to the English could now be breached. The French recaptured Paris in 1436, and over the next 2 decades, steadily drove the English out of their remaining strongholds in France. The war's decisive end came in 1453 at the Battle of Castillon, where the French artillery decimated the English army. This was a battle that marked not just the end of the 100 Years' War, but the end of the era of the English longbow and the beginning of the era of gunpowder and modern warfare. After the battle, the English were left with only one remaining possession in France, the port city of Calais, which they would hold for another century. The English, now consumed by the internal conflict of the Wars of the Roses, had no resources or will to continue the fight. The long, bloody conflict that had begun over a dynastic claim finally came to a close. The legacy of Joan of Arc was evident in this final victory. Her initial military successes, her rallying of the French people, and her ultimate martyrdom had been the catalyst for this dramatic turnaround. She had transformed the conflict from a dynastic struggle into a national one. She had not only helped to secure the throne for Charles VII, but had also helped to forge a nascent sense of French national identity, a powerful concept that would shape the destiny of the nation for centuries to come. The quiet girl from Domremy had become the symbol of a unified and independent France, her story forever intertwined with the final victory of her nation. The echoes of her life and her sacrifice would resonate through the centuries, inspiring writers, artists, and leaders, and making her a figure of immense and enduring significance. The story of Joan of Arc does not end with her death. Instead, it begins a new and enduring life in the collective memory of France and the world. Her final, powerful legacy is one of vindication and veneration, a journey from heretic to saint. Shortly after the conclusion of the Hundred Years' War, King Charles VII, whose crown she had secured, recognized the political necessity of clearing her name. To allow her to remain condemned as a heretic would be to cast a shadow on the legitimacy of his own coronation. Thus, in 1450, he ordered an investigation into her trial. This new inquiry, a reversal of her original trial, was a meticulous and thorough process. The Pope authorized a formal retrial, which was held in Rouen from 1455 to 1456. The proceedings involved hearing testimony from over 100 witnesses, including many who had known her personally or had served with her in the war. They spoke of her piety, her unwavering faith, and her courageous spirit. They recounted her kindness and her compassion for the poor and the sick. The testimony systematically dismantled the charges of heresy and sorcery, revealing the original trial to be a politically motivated farce, filled with procedural errors and biased testimony. On July 7, 1456, the retrial officially annulled the verdict of 1431. Joan of Arc was declared innocent, and her honor was restored. She was no longer a heretic, but a martyr for the faith and for her country. This act of rehabilitation was a crucial step in her journey towards sainthood. It also firmly established her as a symbol of French national unity and independence, a heroine who had, by divine intervention, saved her nation. Over the centuries, Joan's image has been reinterpreted and embraced by various groups. She has been an inspiration to writers, artists, and composers, from Shakespeare to Mark Twain. She has been a patron saint for French soldiers and a symbol for various political movements. She was, and remains, a powerful figure for women, a testament to female strength and courage in a world dominated by men. Her story of a simple peasant girl rising to lead armies has resonated with countless people, transcending the boundaries of time and culture. In the 19th century, with the rise of French nationalism, there was a renewed interest in Joan. This culminated in her beatification in 1909 and her eventual canonization as a saint by the Catholic Church in 1920. The decision was a powerful affirmation of her life and her claims to divine inspiration. Today, she is one of France's most revered figures, a national patron saint and a symbol of unity, courage, and faith. Her feast day is celebrated on May 30th, the anniversary of her death. As we end our quiet exploration of her life, we are left with the image of a young woman of profound faith and unshakable resolve. She was a peasant girl who changed the course of a war, a heretic who became a saint, and a martyr who became a national hero. Her legacy is not just one of military victory, but of the enduring power of conviction in the face of overwhelming odds. Her story, passed down through the centuries, reminds us that even in the darkest of times, a single person with a purpose can ignite a spark of hope that can change the world. And now, as our journey comes to a close, we leave her memory to rest, a testament to the profound and lasting impact of a life lived with courage and conviction.